You see, they look really snazzy, these microphones, but actually you have to nearly like be on top of them for them to pick up. Um, all fur coat, no knickers, if you ask me about them. Um, we're going to start talking about a story which really triggered memories of mine from the beginnings of my career covering crime. And it is probably one of the most fascinating moments in, do we call it gangland history? I don't know. There's an element of that in it, but it featured a drug dealer. Well, he was known as a drug dealer from Newry, a guy called Paddy Farrell, and what happened to him in Drogheda in 1997.
Yeah,
Yeah,
1997.
So we start with that, and then we'll get on to why we're talking about it, Eoin.
Yeah, well, Paddy was found in a bedroom in his 29-year-old girlfriend's house, her mother's house. He was naked on the bed wearing a mask. She was on the floor, also naked. She had, as was found by the inquest, taken out a shotgun, shot him in the head, and then shot herself.
Was that a legally held firearm she had?
It's kind of ambiguous because she had borrowed it from someone, and I don't think there was any license. She had borrowed it from a licensed firearms dealer.
Yeah.
But whether there was a license or not, but I mean, she borrowed it because she was interested in, she told me she was interested in hunting or shooting rabbits or whatever. You know.
Right. An intriguing scene. It's obviously some sort of a sex game that has gone wrong, but you unravel the story and you have Paddy Farrell is her lover. He's a married man from Newry, and he is suspected at the time of being one of the biggest drug dealers in Ulster, or we'll say along the border. Most of the those who operate along there will also filter down to Drogheda, Dundalk, big towns, and feed into the north up to Belfast. So, like, it's such an unusual thing to happen for so many reasons. But he's what, in his 50s at that stage, was he?
49, and she's
49.
29.
And how long was this relationship going?
A few years at least.
Yeah.
You know, so
and obviously it played out in her parents' home.
Yeah.
He'd come visit her.
He'd obviously come visit her, yeah. They were apparently downstairs watching an Ireland soccer match, and they could hear the mobile phones going upstairs, and eventually somebody went up and opened the door. And originally, I think, thought they were sleeping, and maybe just didn't look properly. And then went back up again and ran it into the street and got the local undertaker to come in and look at them, who was a neighbour.
Right. And this is what was discovered. And it was in the news at the time. It was, I was telling you briefly, I do recall a photographer going towards Newry to try and take a photograph of his home, which was pretty big. And a associate of his, a guy by the name of Brendan Speedy Fagan, got very annoyed about this and took the film out of the camera, and there was a kind of a set two between them. But it was, it was recorded in the media, the story, but no one really ever got to the bottom of it, did they?
Yeah, it seemed to fade very quickly.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there weren't any answers. I mean, there were odd circumstances. Lorraine had bought a grave, two-person grave the week before. She'd borrowed a shotgun. And, so it seemed to indicate that, that she...
This was a murder-suicide.
Yeah, that she had this in mind. On the other side of the story, there is no recorded instance that I could find of a murder-suicide happening in these circumstances.
Yeah.
There was money missing, apparently.
You mean in the circumstances by the woman doing the murder and then turning the gun on themselves?
It will happen, but it'll generally be somebody who's being, oppressed by a man for years and at the end of their tether. That almost invariably is the scenario. And invariably the woman will go off on her own for maybe a couple of hours and then end her own life.
Yeah.
Not
that way. Or else we did see an awful lot of, maybe they come in spates, I don't know, familicides and these murder-suicides where it's the man who is the kind of perpetrator as such.
That's the most common. There's a huge literature on that, and there are three main different divisions in that as to, it's been studied. This hasn't been.
It just hasn't happened before. And to place that story then in the middle of the end of the 1990s, when really cannabis was the drug that you were going to make a lot of money on. You still probably had that second wave of heroin. But I think it is just before really cocaine is filtering in, but before you get the cocaine boom of the 2000s. But nonetheless, there are gangs all over the place that people don't necessarily know about, and they're beginning to make a lot of money in this game. But Paddy Farrell is a guy who's lived up around the border in Newry, and reason we're talking about this is because, of course, the opening of your new book, The Bureau, starts with a letter that Paddy Farrell had written to your father, Brendan, when he was in prison in Cork. So this is some years previous.
Yeah. I suppose to explain the relationship, my father was a solicitor, very high-profile solicitor, still highly thought of. Even now the book has come out, people come up to me and say, but he was a great man, which is interesting. But he was struck off, charged with fraud, spent a lot of time in mental institutions. Half, I think, because he had a breakdown, also half because it's the go-to escape from when somebody's coming after you with a writ or a fraud charge.
Yeah.
Sign yourself in. But when he eventually got out, he started a bureau de change in Newry, the first bureau de change on the border, which was a maverick idea, very typical of him, and also a brilliant idea. There was a lot of money to be made legitimately through a business like that. But it was a magnet for criminality, fraud, anybody with a shotgun, anybody with a dodgy checkbook, and anybody with a sack full of cash that, they couldn't perhaps account for.
So he represented Paddy Farrell as a solicitor, or he knew him through the Bureau de Change?
He may have represented him as a solicitor
Right.
in the past. He may have known him. Like he didn't know a lot of people on sort of around Newry in the whole border area. And they became associates. I think that's probably the best word.
So Paddy Farrell, had he always been based in Newry, or was he based there for a particular reason, for a geographical reason?
Based in Newry, also based in London, something that I know very little about, but I have had a couple of people since the book came out. Somebody told me that they stayed in one of the houses that he owned in London. So
Right.
he had this association with London. But what that was, I'm not sure.
Had he a paramilitary background at all?
No, not at all.
No.
Not at all. I don't think so. He was a lorry driver originally, I think.
Right. So he probably would have known your father mainly through that Bureau de Change, where I'm sure an awful lot of clean money and dirty money went through.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily want to give the Bureau de Change a bad name. I mean, the Bob Dylan line with some rob you with 6 guns, some with a fountain pen. Most of them are legitimate businesses, and you get a good deal.
Yeah,
because you're dealing with border people, and they insist on a good deal.
And of course, bring us back to those years, I suppose. What year did your father? It was 1983. He opened the first Bureau de Change. You obviously had to change your money going up. People dealt in cash mainly. And you had a stream of people coming from this side of the border to go up north to buy toilet rolls and stuff like that.
You would have had everything.
They were buying Christmas presents.
But it would swing both ways. Sometimes, people would go to Dundalk because if the price of the punt, as it was then, changed, it was cheaper there. So it was going backwards and forwards. And then all the shops had cash coming in. So, I mean, they had to change it. And generally, they got a better deal of us than they did off the bank.
And it was a much more cash economy. And anybody who remembers crossing the border in those days, they were dotted. Sometimes they looked like little sheds. Sometimes they looked a bit more sophisticated.
Well, when he opened his, he went for dinner, for drinks with another guy along the border, and my mother was there, and he asked him, how do you make money at this? My father told him, and I remember my mother coming home and saying, I don't think your father should have told this man that.
Okay.
And next minute, a bureau sprang up about a week later.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, the cash that was in it, we'll come back to before your father opens this in a minute, but the cash that was in that, so it's not a bank, so it doesn't have the same kind of security. Was the cash coming home at night?
The cash sometimes came home at night, yeah. I mean, generally, it was left there, kind of reasonably good safe. But yeah, I mean, it came home at night. My mother and father were rammed off the road one night on a sort of back road into Raymondale, through a ditch, through a gate and through a ditch. My father was pistol whipped because he's a man who knew no fear, so he tackled these people in balaclavas, and he was pistol whipped, and they took the money. My mother said afterwards, that was a woman who pistol whipped him.
Right.
They came to the house. They got into the house, waited for my father to come home. one of my brothers, who's also brave as a lion, took after his father, attacked one of them with a loose stair rod and managed to get away. So, I mean, you were living in this constant atmosphere of fear. Somebody walked in and sledgehammered the kind of you know, people know what they're doing in these things. They sledgehammered the bulletproof glass out of its frame because in those things, it's
Yeah.
only as strong as the frame.
Mm-hmm.
Climbed through with a shotgun, took all the money. This stuff was constant.
Constantly going on. And of course, the 80s, of course, the IRA were looking to make money for their fight. There was kidnappings going on. They were desperate for money, take it from anywhere. And then you had general criminality, of course, as well, that people would see opportunities and anywhere where there's cash.
Yeah, paramilitaries weren't really a fear. They're a bit like the weather,
Right.
but just, either it rained or it didn't,
Right.
there's nothing you could do about it. It was more freelancers. There was extortion with political links.
Yeah.
But I'll leave that at that,
But your book, The Bureau, which centres really on a lot of your experiences, and it's a book of fiction as such, but there's a lot of kind of, real life experience in it, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, the skeleton of it is true.
Is true.
The character is true.
And Paddy Farrell features in this opener. What's the letter from prison that he writes to your father?
It's a kind of a thieves' side of the mouth kind of letter. People are named by their first names or not at all. You're a wee man. How did you get on with your wee man? What about this business? You think I'm supposed to be involved, and would that barrister be any good? You think I suppose he'll do. And he named a few people are named, and they obviously know what they're talking about, but the censor would not have known what they were talking about. And
you use it to kind of set the cultural values that are happening in that world.
What it says in the book is, this is the only proof that I have that these events happened. It's the only kind of solid piece of evidence that I actually have. So the rest of it I'm reconstructing from memory or from the newspaper record.
Yeah. Okay. So back to your father, Brendan McNamee. He was a solicitor.
Yeah.
So where you didn't grow up around the border?
He practiced in Newry.
Yeah. He did.
But when I was 15, he started getting into trouble with various things, and we flitted over the border in 6 weeks, bought a house in Ravensdale. Which, looking back, it was pretty traumatic.
He started getting into various things, like into trouble. I think I heard you interviewed, you were talking about him. He had addiction issues with drink. He was a gambler.
He was a serious gambler.
Yeah, was that the biggest?
Yeah, I think, there was at one stage he won a bet of 80,000, which would have bought you 4 or 5 houses then.
Yeah.
And lost 50,000 the next day, because I remember the bookmaker carrying bags of cash into the bureau and putting in our safe. And I remonstrated with my father, going, we can't be looking after his money. What if something happens to it? Not realizing, because of course in these things, the family last to know.
And exactly. I just made a podcast about a gambler and about gambling addiction, and spoke to Colm O'Gara, who's the head of addiction services there in the John of Gods, and he describes it that a gambler will have the balls juggling in the air, but it's not one that falls, they all fall together. And the family sometimes will only find out there's a problem when everything is gone.
Well, that's more or less what happened to us. What he was doing at the end of his second bankruptcy, what he was doing was a kind of Ponzi scheme. There was an awful lot of money flowing through the place, and he was giving very, very good rates, which meant he was losing money on every transaction. And eventually he couldn't keep the balls in the air. But he was gambling as well.
So you had to sort of, I suppose, up to it's 15 when in your life you realise there's a problem that the family run into, you go kind of bankrupt.
Yeah, I mean that was where you talk about John of Gods. He ended up in John of Gods.
Right.
I remember going up there with my mother in a school uniform at night, and as I was driving from Kilkeel at the time, which was 2.5 hour drive in winter time. And he had files which he didn't want anyone to see. So even though he was in a locked ward, somehow he got into the roof space and hidden them up there. And I remember he sent me up to get these things, and there were lost voices coming up through the floorboards, and you could hear the wind howling about, and slates rattling right up the very top of the building. There were no floorboards on the floor; there was just a joist,
right.
And I could see these files sitting, in this room at the end, and that there's a kind of psychic shift in you, something like that. And at the same time, his psychiatrist said, went to my mother and said, Mrs. McNamee, you never told me that that your husband fought with the Green Berets in Vietnam. Like it just strung him this line that he was
He had
traumatized
strung them that
from fighting in
really.
Vietnam.
So these files, I mean, they're related to possibly sort of people who aren't going to come after their money. Is he doing
At
dodgy
that time,
dealings?
that would have been possibly
Would it have been client funds?
client funds, I would say.
Okay.
Something like that. In actual fact, when his practice was eventually went through the bankruptcy process, which he showed very little time for the official assignee, the practice was solvent. He just hadn't sent out bills,
Right.
Um,
So, and that all happened pre-1983.
yeah.
So he reinvented himself essentially as...
That was 1976, 77. So I kind of concertinaed the two bankruptcies. The second time, of course, he was, because he was a bankrupt, he couldn't have a bank account, so he put everything into my mother's name. She was, and she was, her mother was a reader, she was artistic, she liked her game of bridge, she wasn't of this world at all, but she was a woman of that generation, so if this was what he needed to set up the business, that's what she did. And of course, she was catastrophically bankrupted herself, lost everything, lost her house, was left destitute.
But she had taken him back first time out of the John of Gods. He invented himself.
Despite the house we didn't know about, the racehorse we didn't know about, and a mistress we didn't know about.
And when did you find out about them?
When he was inside in John of Gods.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so he had this whole other life going on as well as...
Yeah, I think he had several other lives.
So he had a serious amount of balls in the air.
He did, yeah.
And they all came...
Yeah. He was a clever man, he was a clever man.
Obviously. Yeah. But so, gosh, at 15, you all of a sudden, your father ends up going from, I presume, respected solicitor in the community to the John of Gods, breakdown. Everybody knows about the bankruptcy. And does everyone know about the mistress, the racehorse, and the other house?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
No, that was kind of family. But, we're in the middle of something like that. And, people who have been will recognise this. You think everybody's talking about you. In actual fact, it's only people around you. But one of the things you do find out is that the only people you can trust when you're in trouble are your family.
Right, okay. And do you think he found that out, that your mother obviously remained loyal to him despite some of the things she
and
discovered?
the second time round, he pulled out again, and he had another woman in Newry. And when he was given 6 weeks to live, he had cancer, and she took him back in again after that.
Right.
What would you do, I suppose? But,
I don't know.
Yeah.
She sounds like she put up with an awful lot.
She did. And one time I saw her falter. She was very old school. We were standing outside the forecourts, and she had a bankruptcy hearing.
And what year would that have been?
That was in 1985, I think.
So in and around the time he's opening the Bureau de Change?
No, that was way back. That was back in 83, so let's get 85, 86, something like that. And she was standing outside the forecourts. I'm not great with dates, Nicola. Standing outside the forecourts, going in for this bankruptcy hearing. Very, very intimidating, and she was looking up and down the street, like, would he come? Because that was his business law, he knew how to...
And he was going to help her how to approach this.
But he didn't come.
He didn't show up. Okay, and where was he then?
He was in Newry, locked into the bureau, and the extraordinary thing was people were still doing business with him.
Right, okay.
Because he inspired that kind of loyalty in people. He'd helped a lot of people out of a lot of scraps, and they still came to him.
So talk about the opening of that Bureau de Change. You've lost the first house. Is there somewhere for you to go and live? Is it in your mother's family?
He bought a house in Ravensdale.
In your mother's name?
Yeah. In his own name at the time, and then went into the bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Into his first bankruptcy. One of the things about that house, I went, because there were letters coming every day, from banks, and he got a bridging loan for it. That's how he got a bridging loan, and then of course,
I don't think they do them anymore.
No, but they're very high interest.
Right, of course.
So you get hammered on him, and then didn't get the mortgage because he went bust in the meantime. So these letters coming every day. I went for years. He negotiated a way out of it somewhere along the line.
Right.
But I went on for years thinking that that they were coming for the house every day.
Right.
And then, of course, in the end, he did.
And this was throughout your kind of late teenage years into your 20s.
Yeah, into college and all that.
All of that period of time was pretty stressy.
Yeah. I remember bringing a friend home from college. I did law in Trinity, and my father showed him how to rig a jury.
Right.
I was going, this is kind of embarrassing.
Yeah.
Because you could rig a jury then.
Right.
And particularly along the border, you could certainly rig a jury.
So was the Bureau de Change then purely business, or did he do other types of business through it and meet other types of characters? I'm getting the impression that he's on the face of it, a family man, and obviously even within the family, he's being exposed as not quite that. But he's charming. He's got friends in all sorts of places, and is his bureau de change a place where he is a bit of a fixer?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, I remember Paddy Farrell coming in, and he was up on charge of fraud or assault. He assaulted 7 cops because it took 7 cops to put him down.
Right,
And as he says in the book, so who was assaulting who?
right,
But he'd a cut over his eye, so and it didn't look good going into court. So my father sent him around to the chemist and to get one of those kind of flesh-coloured eye patches.
right.
So he went from being a man who looked like he'd been in a fight to a sympathetic creature who had a bad eye.
Right, okay.
You know,
And
so he
they'd
had that
attacked him anyway.
kind of get street lawyers thing.
Right,
Yeah,
yeah. So a kind of a fixer, and he'd give advice. He'd
yeah.
maybe, would he help with investments?
I don't know. I don't
Advise on
I
that?
don't know, but legally, yes, he would help.
Legally, he was able to give
Yeah.
bits of dodgy advice, like how to.
Well, kind of straight advice, but he had things like 2 relatives came down from South Armagh when he was dying, in fact, with a bottle of whiskey, and I thought they're coming down because, these guys would have got plenty of free advice off him over the years.
Yeah,
With a bottle of whiskey, and I thought, well, they're coming down to pay their respects and say goodbye. But no, they had a bull, they brought a prize bull which wasn't fulfilling its function. And he wanted to know how to sue the Ministry for Defence because helicopter overflights were obviously causing the bull not to function.
And on his deathbed, he was seeing this as being a good case.
No,
Yeah.
he wouldn't see them when he found out what about it. It's like,
Okay.
I'm gonna go away, Jesus. Yeah.
But you're painting a picture of a very interesting character. Obviously not a very good father, but a very interesting character.
Yeah, he was. I mean, he was. I mean, he was interesting and charismatic. In the past week since the book is out, people have said to me, but your father's a great man.
Mm.
People have said, he could. I get a message from somebody I don't know on Facebook. Your father's very good to me. These things keep coming in. So he was. I mean, I think his great strength and his great feeling. His great feeling was he had no respect for authority whatsoever, whether that be police, courts, whatever. And I think when he started out as a very proper young solicitor and saw the state of the law in the north and how corrupt it was, I think that kind of broke something in him. So his great feeling was he had great strength was he had no respect for authority, but his great feeling was also he had no respect for authority.
Yeah, yeah.
So he just didn't see it as, he didn't see the rules, so he didn't really play by them.
And did he have, at that point in time, to have had the education to be a solicitor? He obviously came from a privileged background himself.
No, my grandfather, his father, started out as a pavvy,
Right.
selling from a 10-acre farm in South Armagh, selling stuff off the back of a bicycle.
Right.
Eventually, there's a story about him standing at the bottom of Monaghan Street in Newry, selling silk stockings to the mill girls who came in from Bestbrook.
Yeah.
I thought there's something kind of a kind of service to desire in there. So there's something kind of, and opened a draper shop. And I think my grandmother was very driven. I mean, there were people from that.
Was he an only child?
No, there were 4 of them.
Mm.
He went to Queen's. My aunt went to Queen's. One of my aunts did a year in Trinity, a year English in Trinity. I don't know why she left. And the other guy looked after, stayed and looked after the shop. So there was a drive there, and he was, again, he was known as a great scholar, very bright in the Abbey in Newry.
But he brought a lot of trouble to the family and to your family, to his immediate family. He brought trouble to your door. He didn't keep. It sounds like a very stressful kind of coming of age you had.
Well, the way I describe it is, and people will identify with this, is when you live with somebody who is an addict or gambler, drink, whatever it might be, or abusive, the atmosphere in the house changes when you hear the key in the door. There's a hypervigilance. So a place just rearranges itself. Everybody tenses up. And that would have been the way it was. And you didn't realise till he left for what he thought was good, that was what was happening. But the whole border operated in that kind of level because you never knew what was going to happen. You never knew what was around the next corner. You never know, your school bus has been stopped by armed soldiers. So that hypervigilance. There's an analogy between the two, between the very personal interior thing of living with an addict and the public, the way the public realm worked as well.
So it was happening outside the door plus inside the door.
It was happening, yeah. I mean,
The same atmosphere.
yeah, it was the same atmosphere along the border.
And did you see your father gambling? Did you know? Did you have an understanding of it?
I wonder, your sort of counsellor friend, is this a common thing as well? He left clues behind him all the time. He never got rid of the betting slips. You'd find them in his pockets, whatever.
Right.
So
Did
whether
he speak about his wins?
no, never, or his losses.
And was he an authoritarian figure in the household?
Not really. He would have been very quietly forceful. He was a presence. He wasn't a particularly 5'10", 5'11", kind of slightly built man. He wasn't. He didn't go in for roaring and shouting. And if you're in trouble, he was a man even as kids, sometimes kind of cars, stuff like that. He was a man you wanted to go to, and he was a man that other people wanted to go to as well, because he would find a way. Was it of its time that your mother didn't probably have a full handle on the finances? Yeah, that would have been off the time. Yeah. Although I get the impression he controlled it pretty tightly. And there was a story you've told about how the aforementioned Paddy Farrell, we might talk about your impressions of him, but you were studying law and your father got him to drop you down to college in Dublin at a very difficult time in Paddy Farrell's life. Well, yeah, he was. I think he's been sought after on both sides of the border, and I called into the bureau because, as kids we worked there because it was your family. You had to kind of support it, and also we were trustworthy. We weren't going to make off with the cash. And I called in, and I was getting the train to Dublin to Trinity, and Paddy was there, and my dad said, "Paddy will take you." And had you no idea about who Paddy Farrell was? I knew exactly who he was. Yeah, okay, yeah, but I kind of okay, right. You didn't want to refuse the lift. Well, I didn't. Yeah, I don't know. I just went along with it, and he showed three. We were stopped 3 times. We went down the side roads, and he drove high-end motors, but then he had kind of like a little Escort or something like that for. When you wanted to kind of go onto the radar. And we were stopped 3 times, and he showed 3 different forms of ID, as far as I could see, in different names. But we kind of got chatting going down the road and went into Dublin the back way. So we're coming down past the forecourts, and we were laughing about this idea that, in 10 years' time, I'd be the guy with the white wig on as prosecutor and he'd be the defendant. Exactly. And he dropped me outside Trinity. Of course, I never went to law, and he never got that far either. And you like to think that your father didn't really consider who he was getting you the lift with? Well, do you know, another memory came back to actually that I haven't sort of mentioned to anybody. We used to go to Cong in County Mayo on our holidays, and he arrived down once with 4 guys, 4 kind of burly guys, and there was a lot of drinking going on. Guys from the north, a lot of kind of serious drinking going on, and they were going back, and for some reason I had to be back, so he sent me back with them. And it wasn't until we got to the border and they showed the warrant cards that I realised I was crossing the border with 4 RUC men. Right. So, so it wasn't the first time. Yeah. And had he respect? Did he have hopes for you to, become a lawyer? And yeah, I think he did. Yeah. Although when I started this business of wanting to be a writer, the first thing he wanted to buy me a full-length black leather coat. Now, I was going I want to be a writer. I don't want to be a sort of SS stormtrooper. Yeah. What was that about? I don't know. I have no idea what that was about. But when he died and I was cleaning out the bureau, I came across, my first poem was published in the kind of famous New Irish Writing in the Irish Press. First piece of work I published. And I came across about 70 copies of it. Oh, he kept them. He must have bought every... He bought every copy in Uri, yeah. Yeah. Because, of course, nothing was online those days. So, if you lost one, that was it. Yeah. I still have clippings myself from back in the day when my first articles were published in the evening press. Yeah, but you don't bother anymore. Well, they're not at all, but you don't bother after kind of, especially writing for newspapers, you're writing so much, turning out so much. But that first time the byline is there, it's still kind of yellowed and in my garage, and I find it every now and then. It's almost ready to crack. Yeah, I've got a few of those, all right. Put it in a frame, really. Yeah. But of course, it makes you feel old. So how long was the bureau operating for? It operated, after he died, it operated, kept on going because my mother had no income. Right. So I kind of ran it remotely with the 2 very good young people, kind of who should have been in charge of it in the first place. Yeah. and kept it clean and kept it running and kept it taking over.
And was it people just coming in, like going up with €200,
Yeah, I mean,
pounds back in the
the
day?
busy time would be the 12th because the north would empty out. Everybody would go,
Right.
basically all the Catholics would go south. And there'd be queue down, there'd be line down the street,
Yeah.
250, 350, that kind of, holiday money. Because you couldn't use your card both sides of the border at the time.
And you'd be left with a lot of cash, though, on the premises.
Yeah.
So it was safe.
Well, it was safe as long as, it was safe within the place.
Yeah.
But of course,
You tried to move it.
You had to get it somewhere. You had to change it, kind of. So, that was always.
And was it robbed many times?
Many times, yeah.
Yeah.
Many times, yeah.
And that was just part of your risk.
Yeah, and every time you went out with money, you're going up through South Armagh there to pick up money from someone, from some of the shops up there, and you're going along, you're kind of thinking, if somebody steps out in front of me, it doesn't really matter who it is, I'm not stopping.
Yeah, exactly. People who work in war zones say that if you're in a tank, you don't stop for anyone. You just go over the top.
Unfortunately, I was in a Nissan Sunny or something like that. I didn't have a tank.
You're a war zone. Mm-hmm. So when did you leave Ireland? When your father died, you were away, was it?
Yeah, well, perhaps we kind of start maybe around the time of when he went bust, that time.
Yeah.
I was in Spain with my girlfriend, now my wife.
Now let's try and get a little bit of a year on that.
Yeah.
So
that's that kind of 86, 87 kind of.
That's 86, 87. Yeah. When does he die?
He died now 32 years ago. What was that?
Okay. NASA. I'm not much good on this either.
93?
Yeah,
93. Okay,
93.
So 10 years. So the bureau he opened the bureau in 1983, just to give people a timeline.
Yeah.
And he ultimately dies around 1993.
Yeah.
So that was there for a 10-year. And it continued. The bureau continued after he died, but that's how long he was involved in it. In the late 80s, you were away writing.
Yeah, I was up
in your leather jacket.
Well, yeah, I didn't get the leather jacket name, but it was up a mountain in Spain. Incommunicado, there was no electricity in this place. Trying to write poetry. And
did you think you were gonna you were up a mountain in Spain trying to write poetry?
Yeah.
Was that gonna? Where were you going with that?
Well, I was trying to be a writer, so I was trying to. I mean, as I always said, you have to do an apprenticeship.
But poetry, you had so much stuff there, but I suppose it has taken a long time for people to feel they can start telling these stories. I think it's a real time now.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of stories are coming out from the north in particular.
Yeah. Well, just to finish that, a rumour went around that I was in Spain stashing the missing money.
Right.
Which, of course, I've been lost in this Ponzi scheme plus gambled. So some of these guys came down to Newry and looking for me, and lifted my brother instead, put a bag over his head, took him up into South Armagh, locked him in a shed and interrogated him. And, when you think about it in those years, you didn't really come back from that sort of stuff, but they let him go in the end. I think there was pressure brought to bear.
So these were not businessmen that he was dealing with at this point. So this is
they perhaps regard themselves as businessmen. Yes.
They regard themselves as businessmen, but he is, he's gone and can't defend himself, but he's running this sort of slightly tricky element of the business. He probably didn't make money out of it because he gambled it and lost it. But he is dealing with people in all sorts of parts of the community.
Yeah.
He's dealing with criminals. He's probably dealing with, paramilitaries. He's dealing with all sorts of dirty money as well as clean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Far as
you didn't. The money came into the door. It's up to the people who own the money.
Yeah.
All he was doing really was changing it.
But your brother's taken off, and they think you are gone,
yes,
to the hills with the money.
Yeah.
And all you have is your poetry, which isn't going to make you very much money. And your brother is allowed. Yeah,
they let him go. I think, my father would have known a lot of people in the police and the guards. And
right.
I think they brought pressure to bear, and they decided that the game wasn't worth a candle. They let him go. Yeah. So. That was. We came back from Spain. We didn't know, myself and my wife. We called from the airport from the airport in Spain to get somebody to pick us up on the other side, and nobody would answer the phone. Our own home phone was dead, and eventually we got hold of an aunt who said, and we wouldn't tell us anything. And we said was because the whole country was agog at this stuff, and we said, is anybody dead? And she said, not yet. So that's all we had to go on. And we got back to Dublin Airport. I was taken off one direction with a special branch escort, and relatives took her off another direction. So, it's kind of. But when you
Was
say,
she just your girlfriend at this stage?
yeah,
Yeah.
Mm.
But
We moved into a basement flat on North Circular Road, and my mother moved in with us.
and how do you explain that
we're
sort of
still
stuff?
married.
I was just going to say that. She stuck around. How do you explain that sort of stuff? I mean, that is just, even then, that was not normal stuff happening.
Well, Marie, I mean, we were together for a long time, so she would have known.
She would have known all the background and what was happening and was understanding of it. I mean, it could have.
Yeah.
She could have gone the other direction, and if she was somebody else and never come back.
She could still go that way.
Yeah, but that's true. That is true. So what happens next?
Well, I suppose you were asking about how this came about.
Yeah.
I was working on a Netflix. Fagans Valhalla was in the writers' room for that, and in a break in the room I was having coffee with one of the producers, and she said to me, "That sounds like." I told her some of these stories, and she said that sounds like The Sopranos. In fact, I thought more like Goodfellas, but I can see what you meant. But for some reason, it knocked the idea of writing it off the tree, kind of thing, off the branch. I suddenly saw a way I could write it, and I thought that kind of objectivity of stepping outside something that you have to have when you write about it. And I think that was character. I saw that this kind of cast of characters.
Of course. But Eoin, I mean, you're having this conversation in Netflix with a producer. You're there because you have become an incredibly successful writer. Your poetry from the hills of Spain probably didn't do that for you, but you published your first book in what, 94?
94, yeah.
Yeah.
94, yeah, Resurrection Man, yeah.
Which became a movie?
Yeah.
Your first?
Yeah, I mean, it's now they referred to as a legendary Resurrection Man, but it's not what they said at the time. We were threatened by the UVF, Sinn Féin were very sniffy about it. The British press came down on us like a ton of bricks, and kind of as IRA sympathisers. And my friend Andrew Eaton, the producer, his father was shot dead by the IRA. So I mean, that went down very badly. So we kind of caught the thing at the wrong time, I think. But
yeah, so you were writing about stuff, and it's like as if certain people aren't ready for it. The establishment isn't ready for it, for a start. But you always had kind of, in your writing, you dipped into the real world or what had happened in a way and fictionalized it.
Yeah, I mean, the reason for that is, these stories demanded to be told that way. It's the only way I could find my way into the actual reality and viscerality. And there's no point in writing a kind of something which is an analogy of something which happened. I mean, the way I talk about it is, those things that the gloves you put on when you're handling a dangerous material in a tank, asbestos gloves. It's like you have to take the gloves off and you have to handle the thing itself. So that's the way I felt about it. When Resurrection Man was written, I finished the manuscript. I gave it to Marie to read. And she read it all through the afternoon, and she put it down, and she said, "It's brilliant," which is very nice of her to say. She said, "But they'll never forgive you."
Right. Okay.
And I mean, I know what you meant. I do know what you meant.
And if things, they have obviously changed a lot. And, there's such a vast amount of stories still to be told that have happened. I stumble upon things myself, particularly going up to the north. You're sitting down interviewing somebody and you're just going, this is just the most extraordinary story, and it's just their life.
Yeah. But the thing is
their
also,
life.
Yeah, but also you're inclined to accept other people's versions of themselves as well, which I try not to do.
There's a lot for people. You've lived in Dublin all your life, have you?
New York, London, Dublin, Sligo. I've been in Sligo for the past 25 years.
You ever go back?
To Dublin?
To Newry?
Yeah, back quite a lot.
But you've never aspired to live there?
No. It was interesting. Somebody from Newry who I didn't know, but we had a lot of acquaintances in common. He sent me a message on Facebook, and he said, we were talking about this, and he said, we're back in Newry. And I said, I joking, I said, would it be welcome? And he said, you can walk down Hill Street with your head held high.
Right. So it has... But has the time come now that people accept that this stuff went on, that it's no longer a secret, that it's...
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, it is a long time ago,
It is a long time ago, but yeah.
I mean, it goes on, except in another guise, and perhaps in even crueler guys, if you like. I mean,
But it's a long time ago, but it just didn't stop at a particular time. It went on and on and on and still goes on in many ways,
well, I
as you
mean, the
say.
thing that I've ended up writing about a lot in radio plays and stories and things like that for the BBC is basically modern slavery. But people been brought into the country. We've had meetings with the Gangland Licensing Authority in the north, and sort of made radio dramas out of it. Never actually got it to TV because that was the original thing. Children been smuggled in. Air crews been taught how to recognise the effects of particular drugs on children, how to recognise when the adult with them is not. Uh,
The parent.
there's not a rapport between the
Right.
parent.
Yeah.
Whether they feed the child, that's the other thing.
Right.
But if you look, I mean, there's a way people regard the North as being the past bubbling up under people's feet, and it's a kind of colonial way of looking at it, as if, you can't help yourself. You're living the 17th century all over again. But if you look at the shape of the world now, it's actually the future raining down top of us. If you look, and one of the ways that I think about that was the 49 people in the back of the lorry at Lowestoft. Those were all border guys involved with that. Those were all smugglers.
They were, and they smuggle everything.
Yeah.
And it's a commodity to them, human life, in the same way as tobacco or drugs.
Yeah, and I mean, but that's what borders do. I mean, I think my feeling is that the border is what a colonial power leaves behind in the landscape, and it attracts wrong to itself. It leaves each side of it provisional. There's no real political settlement, and that works as well for if you look at what's happening between Pakistan and India at the minute. You look at the Sykes-Picot line, which runs through the Middle East. You look at Trump's border wall. You look at Orban's razor wire. You look at as Sally Hayden has described, the effective wall that Europe has built between itself and Africa, and the horrors that emerge from that.
As NASA pointed out to me in the book, the border is almost a personality or a character in the book. So, do you mean that, and what is it now then? Is it still something?
Oh, absolutely, of course. I mean, people are brought in.
You're making that sound like a very black place,
Well, it's not the place. It's the idea of bordering.
Yeah.
For instance, one of the things that the Gangland Licensing guy in Belfast is telling us that what they'll do is they'll pick up people in Eastern Europe outside drying out facilities or mental hospitals, put them in the back of a minibus, drive them to Ireland, take their passports, basically use them as slaves and squalor. I mean, when you hear these kind of things about 5 Eastern European guys in a car crashing into somebody, and then there's these are people whose lives have been used and manipulated. I mean, if they're going for an insurance claim, money is certainly not going to them. But they use the border. If things get a bit hot on one side of the border, which they don't really, because the police, as far as I can see, aren't really that interested, they ship them from north to south, and
it's the same with prostitution rings, of course, as well. They do the same.
Well, but the difference is that what he said was, prostitution is illegal. So this is a better way of making money because it's a grey area. I mean, it probably is illegal on some level, but it's not. There's no criminal law aimed specifically at it, which there is with prostitution.
This isn't obviously the first time you've considered the border and what it is in society and what it does. Was this the writing of the book, The Bureau, and you're about 4 years writing it, are you?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Is it the first time you really considered your father?
No, no. As my brother says, we leave your father alone, he's dead. But no, I mean, I did the Blue Trilogy, which started off with the murder of Patricia Kern in 1952, the unexplained real-life murder, and her father, Judge Kern. And then the 3 books are based around cases that he was involved in, including Robert McGladder. He was the last man to be hanged on the island of Ireland from Newry. And I mean, what I didn't want to reconstruct. My father would have been a contemporary of Lance Kern, the judge's son, in law school in Queen's in Belfast. So I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to kind of follow him into that, or to do a kind of biography. I just wanted to kind of walk in those shadows and find out. I mean, I think that's where I got the kind of feeling that one of the things which emerged from those books was how did this Kern was a very upright, high-flying young lawyer, ended up corrupted. He was a guy who was going to send the man who didn't murder his daughter to the gallows. So I was kind of explore how did that come about? And I think it comes about because the society itself is corrupted and the legal system is certainly corrupted.
But your father, like, as the personality, as that sort of force within the family, although you say he wasn't so authoritarian, he was probably the most dominant, because of a lot of catastrophes that happened around him. Had you considered, you know, him being your father and what that meant and did to your life?
Well, yeah. Well, kind of obliquely to that, somebody said to me, "Do you realise how many people around your father died violently?" And I said to him, "Well, that was sort of just the times." And we looked back at, was it just the times? What was this kind of slipstream that
Mm.
he brought with him? That so many people died, from judges to policemen to clients. You know,
And what did you think about that?
I don't have an answer. I
Right. You've
really,
just accepted it that the lot
yeah.
of
Well, I
people
mean,
around him.
I'd never thought of it like that.
Yes.
But I mean, perhaps it was, I mean, the places he inserted himself. I mean, one of the things which he did was he was involved with the Ireland UK case, the torture case, the inhuman degrading treatment, which was the hooded men, basically,
When he was a solicitor.
when he was solicitor, yeah.
Yes.
And which I remember reading these guys' testimonies, their statements, sitting at on the dining room table, because he would have them home with him, and the immediacy of what happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
And the dread. And one thing that was never really brought up in these kind of very deliberate 5 techniques that they inflicted with them, along with, setting dogs on them and all that sort of stuff, was that they all thought they were going to die because they couldn't do this to us and let us go to tell the world.
Mm.
So if you look at, I mean, how things work, that case, now those techniques were taught in some school of the damned, some are Abu Ghraib.
Yeah.
The guy standing there with his underwear over his head is in those files. Same thing in the north. So somebody taught that.
Mm.
I think it's about the politics of occupation. It's about breaking people. It's not to do with getting information off them. But that case was used as a reason, as a standard for the American government, legally considered,
Yeah.
in the Attorney General's opinion, as up to which you could torture and not call it torture. So a case we set out to combat torture and inhuman degrading treatment
Mm.
became the standard up to which you could torture someone
Right.
and still not legally call it torture.
And your father was involved
He
in
was
that?
involved in that, yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
And does that stand today, or is that
that
still?
stands today, yeah,
That
yeah.
stands
Yeah,
today.
it's still there, yeah. So he's involved in a lot of cases, and, I mean, those were extremely violent times, extremely disruptive times. And I went back through the archives and the local papers, and you'll see day after day being in court somewhere, standing up for someone, who'd been, beaten up by the army or whatever it might be. He was
Yeah.
the first person to get someone released from internment by legal process. So you got to add the good with the bad as well.
And do you think then the extracurricular women and the secret life and all that was a way of, like, a kind of blowout after, I suppose, sponging all this?
Well, I'll tell you something about the book which I didn't realise till I finished it. That the book is about men
Mm.
and what they consider themselves entitled to, which is very relevant when you see, if you like, the authoritarian right now, and you look at the American government and
Yeah.
the cabinet there. Cormac McCarthy has a phrase, the American writer, about a gang of scalp hunters in the Sonoran Desert in California, and he calls them a legion of horribles. And Trump's legion of horribles are those men.
Yeah.
So I think he probably considered himself entitled to it because he was around men who did the same thing.
Yes. So it's sort of, it almost corrupted him.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Would he have been a different man if he lived in a different place, in a different part of the
don't know.
world?
Yeah, I don't know. He
Mm.
liked good things, He liked to have money and spend money.
And is there much of him in you? Any of them?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I have considered it. Yeah, no, in a way, maybe that kind of certain lack of respect for authority, maybe. Yeah. But no, I don't have that. I think to be someone like that, you have to have that fearlessness. And I don't have that.
Yet you have sort of, I mean, he must have been a creative person as well, and to have a creative mind, and obviously you do have very much that.
Yeah, well, he was known for his ability with words in a courtroom.
Yeah. And just before we finish up, and by the way, anybody listening or watching this, the book, The Bureau, Eoin McNamee, is only out. A fascinating read, and a lot of this, what we're talking about, is within it, isn't it? It's a tapestry of real events fictionalized as such, and some real people fictionalized as well. But just tell me about Dominic Mad Dog McGlinchey, who's features as well somewhat as a character. He was, for people who don't remember him, you wonder how these human beings, there seem to be, I always think when I'm talking about, you know, the troubles and that, there seems to be an awful lot of really bad people able to do really, really bad things. Is that wartime? Are human beings capable, or, you know, were they just given opportunities to do we have that in us as human beings, and they're just given opportunities to cloak some of it in politics?
Well, I mean, if you look at what happened in the north, I mean, it was a confluence of many, many things that enabled that to happen.
Mm,
But you do feel, if no matter how you explain it in historical or political terms, that there is some other dimension to it, whether you call that sort of evil or whatever. But you do get the sense that that sort of beast that was there didn't go away; just moved on somewhere else. Just kind of moved to Gaza or wherever,
yeah,
moved to places like that. So McGlinchey had killed 30 people, over 30 people that they know about. He said he liked to get close. And he was extremely charismatic. I
yeah.
mean, Ed O'Brien featured him in a book. Bernadette McCaskey spoke
Mm,
very, very highly of him. And yet, he was a stone killer.
mm.
Um, uh,
And yet he was, and this is what you find a lot of the time, he was a loving husband and a loving father,
yeah, of course, yeah.
and had this other dimension. But of course, he did bring elements of his world into, his children were taught what to do
Yeah,
i-
yeah,
i-
when
i-
to empty his pockets if something happened,
if
if
something
he was
happened.
shot, yeah.
And remind me how did they both die together, himself and his wife?
No, she
No,
was bathing the children, and two
she
guys
was
came into the
bathing,
house and,
yeah,
and shot her.
and shot her.
Yeah, and then subsequently he was in Drogheda getting a video with one
Yeah,
of his sons in the car, and
in the same sort of timeline, was it?
no,
I
no, it's
just
a couple,
can't
couple,
quite
couple of years in
remember. A
between.
couple of
Yeah,
years
yeah,
in between.
yeah.
So she was bathing the children, and they came
Mm,
in and shot her, which
yeah.
is just, that's an unusual.
Well, they blamed her for
Mm,
something that took place on the border for
mm.
another killing. I think that seems to be the wisdom on that one.
Did your father know of him? Do you know?
He
Was
was
he?
certainly known of him.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, what links there may have
But
been.
he
I mean,
sort of filtered into your consciousness
there's a
of.
kind of speculative trail in the
Yeah,
book. I mean, you
yeah,
read the book and find out
absolutely.
what it is.
Okay.
But everything was linked to everything in those times. I mean,
Yeah. Well, Eoin McNamee, thank you very much.
thank you.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.